Have you ever wondered what drives someone to take another person's life? Serial killers are often motivated by power, revenge, or a macabre desire for control. But some go beyond our capacity to understand. Today, we're going to dive into the minds of the serial killers with the most bizarre and terrifying motivations in history. Get ready, because what you're about to discover challenges logic and reveals the darkest side of human nature. Case 1. Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento, had an insane belief that led him to commit a series of terrifying crimes. He believed that his blood was disappearing, that his veins were drying up, and that the only way to survive was to drink fresh human blood. This wasn't just a simple obsession, but an unshakable belief that made him commit brutal murders. Chase started by breaking into homes and drinking the blood of small animals. But soon, that wasn't enough. He began hunting humans. In one of his most horrific crimes, he broke into a young mother's home, murdered her along with her 22-month-old son, and committed acts of cannibalism with their organs. After drinking their blood, he mutilated their bodies, claiming he needed the organs to stay alive. Richard Chase was captured after leaving trails of blood all over the city, but his explanation was something no one expected. He believed aliens were controlling his body and forcing him to commit the murders. He lived and died in a psychiatric hospital, taking with him the mystery of his twisted mind. Case 2. Issei Sagawa, the Cannibal of Kobe. Issei Sagawa, a Japanese literature student in Paris, shocked the world in 1981 when he murdered his classmate Renee Hartevelt. But the reason behind the crime is what makes Sagawa such a macabre and terrifying figure. He didn't kill out of anger or revenge, but because he had an obsession. He wanted to consume human flesh. Issei Sagawa believed that by eating a beautiful woman, he would absorb her strength, intelligence, and beauty. After luring Renee to his apartment, he shot her in the back. Instead of disposing of the body, he spent days dismembering and eating parts of her. He documented everything in a diary, detailing his satisfaction in eating raw human flesh. Shockingly, Sagawa tried different parts of Renee's body, including her breasts and buttocks, and even stored parts of her in the freezer to eat later. When he was captured, the media was stunned by his calm and cold demeanor. But what truly haunts people is that Issei Sagawa was never convicted. Declared mentally incompetent, he was extradited to Japan and, due to legal complications, was released. Today, he lives freely and has even written books about his crime, revealing that he continues to be obsessed with the idea of cannibalism. Case 3. Albert Fish, the Gray Man. Albert Fish, also known as the Gray Man, is perhaps one of the most disturbing serial killers the world has ever known. He not only committed murders, but had a strong inclination towards self-mutilation and cannibalism. Fish believed that pain purified him, and for that reason, he inflicted extreme suffering on both himself and his victims. He used needles to pierce his skin and whips with metal hooks to flog himself. His most famous crime was the abduction of 10-year-old Grace Budd. Fish lured her to his house under the pretense of taking her to a birthday party, but the reality was much darker. Years later, Fish sent a letter to the Budd family detailing, with cold and graphic precision, how he had killed and then eaten her. He explained that he had an uncontrollable desire to consume human flesh and justified it with a twisted religious view, believing he was purifying his victims and himself. During his trial, the court was horrified to hear about the self-mutilation practices Fish had carried out on himself, including inserting needles into his pelvic region and leaving them in his body for years. Fish was executed in 1936, but his macabre legend lives on to this day. Case 4. Jerome Brudos, the Shoe Fetish Killer. Jerome Brudos was a serial killer with an unusual motivation. He had an uncontrollable obsession with women's shoes and underwear. Since childhood, he stole women's shoes and used them for sexual arousal. Over time, this obsession turned into something much more sinister and deadly. Brudos would kidnap women, strangle them, and mutilate their bodies to keep trophies. He often photographed his dead victims wearing shoes he had stolen. In one of the most disturbing cases, Brudos cut off the foot of one of his victims so he could continue trying different shoes on her after she was dead. He kept the foot frozen as part of his grotesque fetish. During the investigation, police found a collection of shoes and photographs of the victims in the basement of the home where he lived with his wife and children. The idea that an obsession as specific as shoes could escalate into serial murder is what makes Brudos such a terrifying figure. Case 5. Robert Hansen, the Hunter of Women. Robert Hansen seemed like an ordinary man, a bakery owner in Alaska, married, and a father. But behind this facade of normality, he hid a sinister secret. Hansen would kidnap women, take them to remote areas of the Alaskan wilderness, and release them so he could hunt them like wild animals. Hansen used his rifle to hunt the women, giving them a head start to run before he pursued and killed them. He took perverse pleasure in turning these women into defenseless prey. The idea that he managed to live a double life for so long while committing these horrifying crimes still haunts the community where he lived. His reign of terror ended when one of the women managed to escape and report his crimes to the police. Hansen was sentenced to life in prison, but his story remains one of the most bizarre and cruel among serial killers. Case 6. Carl Panzram, the killer who hated humanity. Carl Panzram is perhaps the most cynical and hateful of all serial killers. Unlike many who kill for pleasure or desire, Panzram claimed that he killed simply because he hated humanity. His goal in life was to cause as much suffering as possible. He confessed to murdering over 20 people, raping countless others, and setting buildings on fire just to watch the chaos. What was most disturbing about Panzram was his complete lack of remorse. In his confessions, he described his crimes with pride, even stating that if he could, he would have killed many more. He believed the world was full of evil, and his mission was simply to contribute to that destruction. Panzram was executed in 1930, and his last words to the executioner were, "Hurry up, you bastard. I could be killing someone now." His visceral hatred for humanity, with no personal motivation other than chaos, makes him one of the coldest and most calculating killers in history. Each of these serial killers is an example of how the motivations for evil can be bizarre and unfathomable. From paranoid beliefs to fetishes that spiral out of control, they reveal terrifying facets of human behavior. But it leaves us with a chilling question. How far can the human mind bend before it loses control completely? Could someone, right now, be planning a crime with equally disturbing motivations? Stay alert, because sometimes the enemy is where you least expect it.